You are listening to Talking Star Wars. Greetings, salutations, welcome, and hello, Star Wars fans. This is Talking Star Wars, and I am Connor.
And I'm Alex.
And today we're going to focus on another genre in the Star Wars universe. What's our focus today, Alex?
Yeah, so if you have listened to our previous genre focus episode about westerns, we looked at the intersection of, the science fiction space opera that is the prevailing genre of Star Wars. And we looked at how the certain tropes and aspects of the western genre, specifically spaghetti westerns and other, common in the 70s and 80s genre tropes were present in Star Wars. Today, we're going to look at a more niche genre that has a more subtle impact on Star Wars, but shows the way in which Star Wars takes the aspects of other genres and exists within them when it needs to. And that genre is noir.
So, noir, when did that genre begin? It's not so much I would say the 20s, 20s, 30s. Is that the kind of the heyday of this dark detective moody genre?
This is largely growing out of the noir genre that arose in the 20s and 30s with the hard-boiled detective, the femme fatale, and similar characters and plot aspects.
Mhm. If we were to try to explain this to a Zoomer or a generation, whatever you are, young person you who enjoys Star Wars, we're going to try not to talk down to you. But if you remember a movie called Sin City, that was a very much pastiche on the noir, a very kind of literal black and white grisly depiction of uh, a city's seedy underbelly and all the kind of complicated, immoral characters that populate that world.
Yeah, noir is defined by typically a male protagonist in most traditional noir
Mm-hmm.
with a limited emotional range, a mystery involved, typically a murder, drug smuggling. Female characters are either sexualized or too old or too young to be objects of sexual affection.
And they always seem to have some sort of critical secret that's going to end up stabbing the protagonist in the back by the end.
Yeah, there are no happy endings in
Mm-hmm.
noir. There is simply the ongoing trudge of life. So, yeah, this is sort of in the mid place between the more modern mystery story, which has more aspects of thrillers, and the Sherlock Holmes era, where it was more the educated gentleman who is solving the various crimes. This is the gritty post World War One midpoint, growing out of that damage to society, the amount of death and destruction present in a modern industrial age as it's influencing noir. So the classic film Casablanca takes many aspects from earlier noir films and
Mm-hmm.
sort of is almost an homage to them. Even a movie produced in the 1940s,
Mm-hmm.
we're already past the true heyday of visual noir
Mm-hmm.
in a movie. The 1950s moved into more traditional theatrical, stage play
Mm-hmm.
depictions. The classical noir story is almost encapsulated entirely by a radio drama or
Mm-hmm.
pulp novels. There are visual aspects to noir, certainly, but it is far more a character study and I think general aesthetic than it is a specific visual medium.
You just in seeing how noir has affected other art forms, you can take a look at comic books. You mentioned radio dramas. The Shadow was a radio drama character and a comic book character and an influence on Batman. So I would say Batman is the most noir character. Just this uh, continuously struggling protagonist, limited emotional spectrum, as you mentioned, in this criminal underbelly. So
And then every
yeah.
female character in Batman, as an example, is a femme fatale, from
Mm-hmm.
Poison Ivy to Catwoman. We have no, bright shining
Mm-hmm.
paragons of justice in noir. But
And also Batgirl, if you're uh, the Batman animated series for some reason they pair Batman and Batgirl together, and that's a story for a Batman podcast and how it's icky. But um, I guess switching gears to how noir is depicted in Star Wars.
So at first glance, there doesn't seem to be a ton of overlap. This is
Hmm.
not like westerns where you can say, "Ah, yes, the gunslinger walking into town."
Hmm.
Scene that we have seen a dozen times in Star Wars is present throughout. Noir, again, is a story of more moral grays and doesn't have easy answers. In Star Wars, upon the surface, is more of a hero's journey, good triumphs over evil,
Hmm.
tale of overcoming adversity. We have the noble heroes and the corrupt empire. So thematically, it's not as clear cut a
Hmm.
relation, but there are, at closer inspection, several genre tropes and even scenes and subplots in Star Wars that borrow heavily from the noir genre.
Hmm. I think if you take a look at the original trilogy, that holds up so much more as the archetypes of almost this Greek myth, black and white, good versus evil. But when you get to The Empire Strikes Back to Cloud City, Lando's whole characterization is typical for a noir scenario where you have this um, individual who is a member of the city, a member of uh, the industrial world, I guess. He's in this Cloud City.
Yeah,
It's.
I mean, Lando is
Mhm,
basically a 1860s railroad baron
mhm,
in the way that he treats his people, the way that he feels he has ownership of this city. He has Lobot as his sheriff or
mhm.
his primary minister and seneschal. So
He's the mayor in a noir type story.
yeah, so Lando in the original trilogy is probably the most noir
Mhm,
character. I mean, again, he's also borrowing a little bit from the Western card sharp as
mhm.
well, but there's definitely you can see the parts in Lando where he's treating he thinks he's in a noir story and he's not, which is what comes causes some of his
Mhm,
problems when he has to his gray morality comes up
mhm.
against the hard edged ideals that he's actually dealing with.
He's a corrupt politician. He, you have this, you know, the dark force, this empire come in, and they're manipulating him and his town. And he's giving up his loyalty for safety. It's the politician being muscled by the mafia, um, with Darth Vader being the mafioso or being the you know Senate member who's trying to twist things in this small town.
Yeah, but if we're looking for noir influencing the original trilogy, Lando is about it, and it's not a
Hmm.
direct comparison.
Hmm.
It's more him realizing he's not in the right story, and he has to. Then he becomes General Calrissian and
Hmm.
rebrands himself, which is quite successful.
And he
Lando
gets
is
to
great at rebranding himself.
he gets to destroy the Death Star, a Death Star, not the Death Star. So
Death Star 2.0.
yeah, still cool. The ventilation shaft wasn't a straight line this time, so it was difficult. Um, but I think that we take a look at the prequel trilogy, and there is such a heavy prevalence of this noir story happening almost as a through line throughout the whole trilogy.
And I believe that is possible because we look at the difference in the setting.
Hmm.
The Western influences are much more possible in the original trilogy because the strong aging central government has broken down, and we are now more under the auspices of local control, trying to escape the attention. You know that the empire is almost the federal government in a Western story, where it's
Hmm.
this distant power you don't want to attract the attention of.
Hmm.
But we go back to the original trilogy, and the Republic itself is the strong, aging power of the day, much like the bureaucratic systems present in a noir story. From the police to the feds to the local crime bosses, it's all much more of a prevalent presence.
Hmm.
From Jabba the Hutt goes from ruler of a planet to part of a whole gangster alliance of the Hutts, as seen in the Clone Wars, and we have backroom political dealings, uh, a much more urban environment with the introduction of Coruscant and
Hmm.
Naboo.
And with our protagonists, they're always searching for the answer to some mystery. Uh, and this is where, uh, I mean, the prequels have gained some more acclaim, I feel, within recent years, just because in having the sequel trilogy, it allows us to notice things in the prequel trilogy that George Lucas and his team did that strengthen Star Wars in certain ways. And one, just, visually different storytelling or different design aesthetics. But also, it's this attempt at a complex story, but also one of the detractors is that I don't know if it's necessarily a clear detective story. So, taking a look at the Phantom Menace, you have Obi-Wan Kenobi and Qui-Gon Jinn trying to do a number of things. One, figure out what the Nemoidians are doing. Um,
Yeah, trying to figure out the Trade Federation's political goals and blockading Naboo,
mhm,
which is much different than the Empire is trying to destroy our rebellion. So it starts off with small stakes. It's the job
mhm,
gone wrong trope.
right. And then it leads to greater mysteries when they encounter a Sith Lord. They bring that back to the Jedi. Now there's this investigation into, okay, we have a Sith, this uh, a member of the dark side who hasn't been around for 100 years, hundreds of years at this point.
1,000 years,
A
even, they
thousand
say.
years, yeah.
A millennia, I believe, is what Kiadi Mundi says.
So it's the launch to this mystery, which you could argue is pursued in an engaging way. I don't know. It's in the Phantom Menace. It's a little bit tough because the story is not as upfront and on the surface as A New Hope is. But when you take a look at the Phantom Menace, what sort of noir tropes do you see?
Mostly present in the more gray morality of what's going on, but even
Mhm,
that falls apart fairly quickly with the introduction of the Sith. I would say we really have to look at Attack of the Clones to start
mhm,
seeing wholesale noir influences present, particularly when the story starts taking place more on Coruscant
mhm,
and we start seeing Anakin Skywalker's descent into moral grayness and later darkness.
mhm. Attack of the Clones starts on this neo noir world, which has multiple layers. Just kind of a great allusion to any sort of metropolitan city where you have the higher aspects of government, of religion, and then layer by layer you get into the more seedy bars. You get another hand dismemberment scene, which you know I don't know where I was going with that, but it's another Star Wars hallmark. Um, as far as the this mystery that our protagonists are trying to pursue, how does that launch in Attack of the Clones?
Yeah, so I think you can look at the noir influences on Attack of the Clones in several levels.
Mhm,
So you have both, the aesthetic and visual tropes that are present. We can look at the character archetypes that we indulge in. And we can also look at scene by scene. There are certain scenes that would not be out of place in a straight up noir narrative as well.
mhm,
Like a train heist in a western or the ambush in a war movie.
mhm.
We can look at certain scenes in Attack of the Clones and just it's dripping with noir influence.
We get the city chase through Coruscant at the beginning,
Yeah. So
where
yeah,
yeah,
let's break that down type by type. So
mhm,
first, let's look at the overall thematic elements that are
mhm,
present, and I think we can look at Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith sort of as a package.
mhm,
We have Hayden Christensen as a through line there,
mhm.
and then the looming threat of the Clone Wars. So
With Anakin Skywalker, they're doing almost two character archetypes. You have your emotionally stunted morally gray protagonist. He's riding the line at this point in the beginning of Attack of the Clones between his Jedi training and his more aggressive tendencies, I think would be fair to say. Um, and we get to see bits of his anger and frustration eke out. But he is trying to protect his femme fatale, his Padme.
I wouldn't really describe Padme as a femme fatale.
Mhm.
She's too idealistic for that. She is pragmatic, but she never reaches this area of truly, entering into that femme fatale dynamic.
And she doesn't have that uh, knife twist at the end.
When
There's
we,
no betrayal,
yes,
overt betrayal.
so when we talk about femme fatales in a
Hmm.
minute, let's look at Kira from Solo. So let's finish our discussion
Hmm.
of Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah.
So Anakin has some certain noir elements, but the most noir influences are found in Obi-Wan's subplot in Attack of the Clones. When Obi-Wan is investigating the planet of Kamino, where we have this deep mystery, someone has erased records, there's an abuse of authority, the authorities don't believe the lone wolf who then has to go up the chain of command to the captain and put his badge on the line to go and investigate this strange planet. He has to call on his shady underworld contacts who owe him a favor in the form of Dexter, the owner of a diner on Coruscant with a mysterious past.
And this is where I would say, like, Star Wars could be executed differently because you say shady. underbelly, and the only underbelly in Dexter Jester is the literal one that you see hanging under his shirt. It's done in a campier 1950s way. Could have been, could have been something that was more uh, greasy, dark, depressing. I don't know, but
We see that more in the Clone
yeah.
Wars with certain cantinas and
Hmm.
establishments lower down in Coruscant. Yeah, we even in the novel Dark Disciple, there's a seedy bar where Obi-Wan makes contact with undercover Quinlan Voss regularly, surrounded by criminals and lowlifes.
Hmm.
So I would say as Star Wars has evolved into a more modern age, it has borrowed more heavily
Hmm.
from noir tropes. So,
But it all begins in, we wouldn't have the Clone Wars if we didn't have the prequel movies, so it has to begin somewhere. But we have Kenobi's journey taking him from this seemingly unrelated assassination attempt on Padme, which leads him to the individuals involved in this uh, shady political machination of an army being brewed. By the end of the film, we just so happen to have a war launch in which it would be really handy for the Republic to have an army. It plays as this background mystery throughout the Clone Wars as to, it's great that we have this army, but it's just too coincidental that it's been generated for us. And oh, I guess there's this one lost Jedi. What was his name?
Sifo Dyas.
Sifo Dyas, who had a premonition and saw that we needed to have a clone army, but we learned through expanded universe material that that was quite manipulated by Count Dooku.
Yeah, where Sifo Dyas and his visions were almost crippling, and so
Mm-hmm.
he was taken advantage of by his best friend Dooku to, create the army of the Republic, so that Sidious would have all the tools he needed to manipulate the Republic into a war that would
Mm-hmm.
strip it of its safeguards and allow a Sith Lord to take command.
I view very much the prequel series as a number of serials, and Star Wars is that. That's what George Lucas was inspired by, these little bits of story that were contained, but also part of something larger. So the mystery that Obi-Wan Kenobi's pursuing at the beginning of Attack of the Clones, we don't have the conclusion of that until the very end of the Clone Wars. And that is just, I think about a modern day noir story through Jim Butcher's Dresden Files book series, which is a fantastic urban fantasy series where each book there is this contained mystery, but all throughout we have this larger thread of different enemy forces who are interfering with his life. So to have that represented in Star Wars is again another element of that noir storytelling of seemingly separated but interconnected events.
Yeah. So you'll see the noir influences starting to be present a little bit in Phantom Menace, growing stronger through Attack of the Clones and into Revenge of the Sith.
Mhm.
And I would say that the noir influences in Star Wars become heaviest in the most direct crime story that Star Wars has ever told visually in Solo, a Star
Mhm.
Wars story, where Han Solo and his band of criminals, lie, cheat, shoot their way out of trouble.
Mhm.
We have an actual femme fatale character in the character of Kira.
Who will eventually, spoilers, we have spoiler alerts on all of our episodes, so you should know, but she works alongside Han. She's a element from his past, and he thinks he can trust her. And that's part of why I enjoy Han Solo's portrayal in this movie so much, because even though he is a criminal, he is a very optimistic one. And there's like nothing shaking his confidence, which he has not earned. But leading to Kira, he places all of his faith in her only to have her run away with all the money at the end and his heart.
Yeah, leaving, as with any noir protagonist, the job done, but the taste of victory being ashes in his mouth.
Mhm.
Taking the few scraps he has left, the ship he has managed to steal, and the partner he has made in crime, and going off to try to eke an existence out in this uncaring and cold universe.
Mhm.
If some soft jazz had started to play while he stared in gray over a pier, it would have been appropriate at the end of Solo.
Mhm. And it's interesting just reflecting on it now. Han Solo in the original trilogy is your kind of down and dirty cowboy, and they managed to tell a noir story with him. And there are some tonal similarities between the protagonists in a western and a noir story, but just the narrative that they placed him within allowed a noir story to be told. And
Yeah.
it's very Han Solo without it ever being portrayed on screen before. So go watch Solo. Stop hating on it. It's a good movie. It's the best Disney Star Wars movie, in my opinion.
Well, I would say Rogue One is the best Disney Star Wars movie, but we'll agree to disagree.
That'll,
That's a war movie.
that could be an episode for another day. We can set a number of criteria and have a debate, and then you, the audience, can decide who is more convincing.
Yeah. So yeah, we look at this. It has all Solo has all the aspects of a noir story that we previously identified. An element of criminality, the presence of various authorities and powers that are too large for our protagonists to handle on themselves.
Darth Maul, for example.
The Republic,
Mm-hmm.
the Empire, all of the even the small time crime boss that leads Han Solo's little organization at the start of the movie, before he's even known as Han Solo, is
Mm-hmm.
too much for him to handle.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have a constantly outclassed protagonist bouncing from plane to plane, idea, desperately trying to survive in a gritty urban environment, engaging in crime, investigation, backroom deals. It's noir all the way through.
And everything you just described, I feel uh, like Solo is great. I feel, but Solo feels like uh, baby's first noir in comparison to Star Wars Andor. Like Andor takes all of the criminal elements, it takes the tone, it takes the protagonist and makes him more ruthless. As far as it doesn't so much have femme fatales, but it has very strong female characters on both sides of the uh, heroic or villainous paths.
Yeah, I would say that Andor reached the point where it's we have examined and re-examined the problematic aspects of the character of the femme fatale through many
Mm-hmm.
works, and this is almost the emergence of them as actual characters
Yeah.
with actual goals, where you could have a morally gray female character who is not reduced to just being sexualized
Mm-hmm.
or um, eye candy for a male protagonist. They can have agency in their own rights. And I would say Andors were reaching that critical point in the examination of the genre trope,
Mm-hmm.
where we can have the compelling female character with certainly goals and sexuality
Mm-hmm.
and ruthlessness, but without having a judgment made about uh, her value as a person based
Mm-hmm.
on that lack of a traditional adherence to a gender role.
I think of three characters primarily, and I'm going to start with the one whose name I remember, Mon Mothma, who is in this place of political power, but at the same time is trying so hard to fund a rebellion while still maintaining safety for herself and her family, who she doesn't even get along with. Um, that is such a compelling story. You also have uh, uh, Stellan Skarsgård's
Luthen,
Luthen's right hand, uh, 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 lady with the face.
Val, who is the leader of the strike team in the second arc, President Andor, who is the mastermind behind a criminal plan to steal payroll from a corrupt government, which is typically the antagonist in a noir story, but everything from going undercover to having the crime plan. It's some overlap with the criminal heist genre as well, but you can definitely see the noir elements there.
And there's a great sort of subtle romantic arc where her and her partner have an eventual falling out because her partner is even more kind of ruthless and to the cause than Val is. At least that was my reading of the situation.
Yeah, and it is ongoing, of course, because
Mm-hmm.
at the time of this podcast, Andor's second season has not
Mm-hmm.
yet been released.
Right.
And who is your third character you identified as a noir character
It's
in
the
Andor?
Imperial ISB major? Is she a general? Uh,
The ISB agent Deidre Miro.
I would never get that ever, that name, but she is fantastic. Just a cutthroat uh, officer who is trying very hard to uncover uh, the rebellion as it is starting to become more prominent, and she's not looking for anything obvious, but she's looking for all of these subtle um, pieces of evidence as to a rebellion forming. Like, yes, it would be scattered, they would be covering their tracks this way, and there's pretty much nothing to her characterization other than her ambition, and that is very refreshing to have from an excellent portrayal as well.
Yeah, where we don't need to feel the need to have her have doubts or have her be forced into the situation against her will.
Mhm,
Where a female character can only be evil if she lacks agency, and as
mhm,
soon as she radiates agency, she will of
mhm.
course be a revert to standard gender roles. We
Right.
we abandoned that damaging area with Deidre Miro, who is both an antagonist and an ambitious
Mhm,
woman, um, and murderous and terrible and compelling all at the
mhm.
same time.
But it's great to see that in a typical noir story, you have your femme fatale who is kind of a foil for your character's arc, who unravels it by the end. But in these ones, you have these three and other, all
Hmm.
the members of this story are churning the narrative and affecting the narrative.
Yeah, the closest character that's fulfilling a narrative role of a traditional femme fatale is actually Cyril, who is a male character who has been forced by instances outside his own control and his own character flaws into engaging in significantly more desperate behavior, and then exists as a foil for Deidre Miro, the real antagonist. So I find that a interesting reversal of how the antagonists in a noir story would typically be portrayed.
And in another conflux of narrative influences, you have this dark noir spy drama with your like Judd Apatow family comedy with Cyril's mom just being overbearing, and I am just waiting for him to snap at some point because she is unbearable. Uh, get revenge on her and his uncle both.
Yeah, so I think we can definitely see Star Wars picking and choosing the bits of genre that it finds most effective.
Mhm,
Andor is a political thriller, a noir
mhm.
story, a heist narrative, a crime story, a interpersonal drama. It combines all of those genres listed in sort of this wonderful stew of almost the perfect Star Wars narrative. If for our pretentious snobs on this podcast. But I definitely think it is still not the
Mhm,
only noir influence. It's the most recent one we've seen
mhm.
in Star Wars, but there are some other areas I like to call out. Any that come to you, Connor?
Canto Bite. They tried to make Canto Bite noir by having this corrupt uh, casino planet that benefited off of warmongering.
Yeah. So for anyone who
And
doesn't remember, Canto Bight is the casino planet depicted in The Last Jedi.
we all remember Canto Bite.
Yeah, where it's almost Las Vegas in space. As mentioned in previous podcasts, Disney actually released a lot of media leading up to The Last Jedi, like contextualized a Canto Bight about its caste system, its complex arrangement of debts and power players, and the actual depiction in the movie was limited and fairly not really nuanced, more just a critique of war profiteering on sort of a surface level way, less so than the complicated series of characters who go into making a truly awful city state
Mm-hmm.
run, and the small triumphs, tribulations, and difficulties they encounter.
I've got nothing more to say about Canto Bite, but I have to say that, like with pretty much any of these genre explorations, you should watch the Clone Wars because with the Clone Wars you will have a different genre aesthetic every single week. Because that is how that show operates, and it's wonderful. One, I can't remember the name of it, but Obi-Wan Kenobi needs to go incognito as a bounty hunter.
I was about to bring up that arc. It's the
Mm-hmm.
most noir arc in the Clone Wars,
There we
where
go.
Obi Wan Kenobi is injected with experimental nanobite treatment that lets him take on the appearance of a bounty hunter, and has to go undercover to try to stop a plot of Count Dooku's to kidnap the Supreme Chancellor.
Did that one involve Cad Bane?
Yes, Cad Bane and
Mm-hmm.
Obi Wan Kenobi and Cad Bane were the leaders of this bounty hunter strike team
Mm-hmm.
assembled by Count Dooku.
So, just in the same way that Han Solo is a representation of Western and noir aesthetics, Cad Bane, the blue alien black hat, is your Western black hat, but he's also your noir mercenary.
Underworld enforcer.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the guy in the back of the unmarked black van with
Mm-hmm.
the Tommy gun who delivers threats on behalf of the Dawn.
Mm-hmm.
That's also Cad Bane.
Yeah.
Any other noir elements that come up to you, whether they're tropes or storytelling devices, aesthetics?
Not so much. We haven't seen anything in The Mandalorian quite yet. I think that in Star Wars Visions, that was much more uh, broad in its genre.
Yeah,
Pastiches?
yeah,
Is that the plural for pastiche?
yeah. You can almost, if for those who have watched The Bad Batch, you can read it. There's a noir reading of a certain arc in The Bad Batch, where the Bad Batch are working for a fixer on a far off planet, where they are the survivors of a war, and they're having to adapt their skills to doing odd criminal jobs for a small time criminal. And you can see the mismatch between their skill set and the type of political savviness needed to move through that world. That sort of juxtaposition is common in noir, particularly post World War One and post World War Two noir stories, where veterans of a war having failing to integrate and adapt back into the normative society they're in
Mm.
is often the you see this as an aside in L.A. Noir, which is a more modern video game telling of the noir story, where our protagonist in the 1950s and late 1940s is a survivor of World War II with deep post-traumatic stress disorder. So I think you can see that same post-war
Mm-hmm.
male character damage present in the Bad Batch and how they have to survive in an imperial galaxy.
As of the recording of this podcast in March, I need to get caught up on the Bad Batch and Rebels. I think I should get caught up on the Bad Batch. Let season 2 finish. Watch Rebels. Get prepped for Ahsoka.
Yeah, so listeners, you need to
Yeah.
help me pressure Connor to actually watch more Star Wars.
Mm-hmm. I need
Uh,
to catch up.
but yeah, that is our exploration of noir in Star Wars. How the femme fatale, as a summary, how we have the femme
Mm-hmm.
fatale character who didn't really exist in the original trilogy, made an appearance in sort of a traditional form in the character of Kira, and was sort of reclaimed in a more modern, um, equitable, and compelling sense in Andor. We have the aesthetics growing more urban and more complex as both technology, set design, and the world in which Star Wars was being produced changed from the 70s and 80s to the more modern
Mm-hmm.
day.
And like the more mature storytelling in more modern day Star Wars as the fan base grows up.
Yeah, and then you also see, along with those character archetypes changing, you can also see the recognition of the mental toll that war takes on people, which has always been sort of a subplot in noir stories
Mm-hmm.
about the grim-faced detective who drinks to forget. You have that same dynamic coming up more and more
Mm-hmm.
in more traumatized and recognition of traumatized characters in
Mm-hmm.
Star Wars.
Yeah. So to transition from trauma, I quite enjoy these genre focuses. I think that it allows us to appreciate Star Wars in a different light. And I would say to our listeners out there, our downloaders of our podcast, if you have a suggestion for what genre you would like us to talk about next, do you want us to talk about fantasy? Do you want us to talk about horror? What would you like us to talk about? Drop us a comment on our YouTube or our subreddit or one of our other podcasty links. We pay attention. We get notifications.
Yeah. So if you have an idea of what genre you'd like us to cover next, drop us a line. Our subreddit is reddit.com/r/talking Star Wars. And thank you for joining us this week for our exploration of noir and Star Wars.
Have a great morning, noon, or night. We'll see you sometime soon in a galaxy right here.